Good morning to the people in the room and the people who might be watching us now on Ustream. We're live streaming the event this morning. My name is Jennifer Bowman. I'm a member of WOCA, Women of Color in the Arts, and I'm also the consort manager at the Folger Shakespeare Library. And I want to welcome you to Source for our creative conversation for colored girls who broke the glass ceiling when a ladder wasn't enough. WOCA is hosting this community discussion in partnership with Americans for the Arts and National Arts and Humanities Month. While the title of our event is meant to be provocative, it's also meant to be evocative of an issue that's on the minds of WOCA membership, the glass ceiling in the arts and arts management. Whether or not you believe any barriers exist for women in the field, we think a conversation on how we can grow, advance, and transition in the arts is worthwhile. Today's event is a combination of activities, stories from a panel of women in the field, and discussion. Each one of us is on a different journey and has an individual story to share, so we hope you will leave the room with new ideas, confirmation of your own ideas, and a larger network. We'll tell you, we are in the 21st century, so we have some ladies from Live Unchained today who are live tweeting our event. And if you want to tell people that you are here and how wonderful it is, you can also tweet the event with hashtag WOCA or hashtag Creative Conversation. So now let me introduce our moderator for the event. She's a Howard University graduate, a radio producer, programmer, and host at WPFW 89.3, DC's local radio station for jazz and social justice. Please welcome Kiana Faircloth.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and thank you for having me here. I appreciate it. I'm honored to be in the midst of such wonderful, beautiful, talented, intelligent ladies in the arts. I want to start with someone who served, or a couple individuals on our panel who have been mentors, Miss Krista and Desiree. So let's start with Desiree. If you could, tell us just a little bit about your story. What drew you to a field in the arts after 20 years in engineering?
In engineering, I wrote technical proposals for design work, all disciplines, civil, structural, mechanical, geotechnical, architecture. And I've always had a passion for theater. And when I went to one of the largest engineering firms in New York, I got the opportunity to do theater in New York after work. And I started college in 1971 in engineering, didn't finish. Finished 3 years, married my college sweetheart, left school. And so that glass ceiling in the engineering firms that I worked for was always looming over my head because I didn't have my degree. When I got divorced, I decided it's all about me now. I'm going back to school, but I didn't know if I wanted to finish in engineering. And I decided I wanted to marry my engineering experience with my passion for the arts. I got accepted at Wellesley College, and they allowed me to design my own major in urban planning and theater production. Why? Because after all of those years in engineering, when the firms were designing and developing communities, I knew and understood that there needed to be a cultural arts component in that community in order to sustain it. So I figured, this is what I'll design my major in. Had no clue what I was gonna do after that. But long story short, and we can get into this individually, when I graduated from Wellesley, I had an opportunity to go to Arena Stage. They had a fellowship, the Allen Lee Hughes Fellowship. I was 40-some years old. I didn't want to start at the bottom. I wanted to get in, learn how to run an arts organization from the top. So I became their first Allen Lee Hughes Executive Director Fellow. I wanted to know how the best did it. And so that's how I segued from engineering to the arts. And I came to Arena at the perfect time. 3 days on the job, the theater decided to renovate and expand that marvelous facility right there on its current footprint. And because I came from engineering, the theater asked me to write the request for proposal for architectural services. So I was instrumental in hiring the architect who designed the new arena stage.
Wow, that's amazing. And it's interesting how you were bitten by that bug just by working after work in theater, right?
Exactly. New York was a fabulous place to work in the arts, and that happened like by happenstance. I happened to be at a rehearsal, and someone said, "We need a stage manager." And someone said, "Oh, Desiree can do it. She's organized. She knows how to get things done." I knew nothing about stage management, but I'm always willing to take a challenge. And the director said, "I'll teach you." And my career skyrocketed after that. I never had to call anyone. People heard, "Oh, I heard you stage manage a job. Will you come do my show?" And I did show after show after show at night after I worked at the engineering firm.
Wow.
So the point is, don't say no. You never know which activity is going to be a stepping stone to the next thing you're supposed to do.
Thank you so much. And Krista, if you could just tell us briefly a little bit about your story. How did you find yourself breaking into the field of the arts?
I had majored in literature and music at Brown, and was supposed to be going into advertising because I had accepted a job in New York to work as an account exec. And I was living in Norfolk. My parents were living at Norfolk at the time, and there was an opera company there. And because music has always been a big passion of mine, during the summer I thought, well, let me see how this might work. You know, I thought about trying to do an internship in college, and I had never pursued it. So I approached the opera company to see if they needed some interns, and they did. They had been without a director of education for many years, for many months, and so I stepped in. I'd never done that work, but I certainly knew a lot about strategic communications and marketing, and I loved kids. They thought that the arts and culture were really important for them to be exposed to, and the short story is that I loved it so much that I called Ogilvy and Mather and told them I wasn't coming to take that job, and I wound up being there for 4 years, becoming director of education, went on to work at Houston Grand Opera, helping them diversify their engagement activities, doing director of community engagement work there, and moved into programming there and commissioning new work, and then came to Opera America to lead some initiatives there. So that's sort of my course, and I got out of opera after a while, and because I wanted to explore other arts disciplines, so I worked in dance and worked in presenting, and wound up spending a lot of time on the funding side, working for different kinds of foundations. And that was fabulous. It's really important to be able to see how the money works, but my hands were getting itchy to be back in the field. And so 5 months ago, I applied for this executive director job, and I got it. And so I'm a new executive director, which is a whole new set of challenges and experiences. But I guess all that's to say, I guess it harkens back to what you said about not saying no, but being willing to change course. Being willing to explore the things that are deep set in you, that you think that you can do, that really are your passions, and to be able to pursue that. Sometimes you do have to take the risk, and luckily for me, I had people along the way. My first boss actually was instrumental in helping me figure out the ways of the arts world, the business world, gave me the opportunity to be creative, helped me tap skills that I didn't even know that I had. And that was 20 years ago. She's still my mentor, and now I'm approaching her because I'm a new executive director. So our relationship has changed over the years, but we can get more into that later.
Absolutely, thank you so much. And both of you, both Krista and Desiree, you are currently serving as mentors. How were you first approached or identified as a mentor?
In the theater world, I mentioned that I was an Alan Lee Hughes Fellow at Arena. I also directed the Alan Lee Hughes program. And for the majority of the years I was at Arena, I was the only person of color on senior staff. So when fellows would come to the theater, naturally, like, why are all the black kids eating in the same place in the lunchroom? They gravitated towards me because I looked like them. And when they heard my story and my passion, then several of them would come to me and specifically ask, could you help me? Could you mentor me? And I love that, because you should not be afraid to ask to have a mentor. When you identify someone who has the skill sets you want, or who can connect you in a way that you can't open a door, don't be afraid to go ask that person. So that's how it really started, the Alan Lee Hughes Fellows coming to me, and then word of mouth, people would say, oh, go talk to Desiree, you know, and people would come talk to me, and I take time. And I also try to be the big sister. I try to be a mother in some instances. I always have an open door. I invite people to my home. I feed them. So it's like, it's very passionate with me about the relationships, because I want the information and advice that I impart to stick. And I'm also willing to say I made a mistake, that I gave the wrong advice, because mentees can show you something different, and I, as a mentor, have learned from the engagement with the mentees who have been partnering with me.
That's great. The first time that someone asked me to be a mentor was at an arts presenters conference several years ago, and I was so shocked because I didn't feel like I had anything to offer. I'd been in the field for several years, but I didn't know how to be a mentor. You know, I'm like, what do you see that I can give you? And what I didn't realize is that, you know, it wasn't just about, you know, let me take you under my wing and help nurture you. It could be about, I've just been approached about a job and I don't know how to actually weigh my options, or I don't know how to negotiate. I'm like, I can help you do that because I'm a really good negotiator. Or I've just been passed over in a conversation repeatedly because nobody hears my voice in a meeting. I can do that, you know. I can tell you about some ways that you might want to think about how to get your voice heard. So for me, it was more specific. You know, there were key ways that I could help people that were asking me for advice, and over time, there have been other people that have wanted me to give them some advice about specific things. But I'm actually looking for more extensive relationships at this point in my career, because I think that there's something I certainly take away so much from being in relationship with other women in the field, and your perspective is really important to me. And so for me now, I'm looking for ways to not only provide maybe that very specific task kind of advice, but also you know, hear how things are going and meet regularly and sort of just be a support system. I mean, even though, you know, I'm about to push 50, I am still looking for a strong, I know, but a strong network. You know, we need that network. It's important. So, you know, I'm open. I would love to have a group of people that we could, you know, be mutually supportive of each other and share that information.
You mentioned rather that you still have a mentor that you look to for advice. How important is that to you, being executive director now?
Yeah, I know.
At Black Rock Center for the Arts.
Yeah.
Why is that still necessary for you?
Well, you know, it's. I was reading an article. It was actually a Harvard Business School article, but I happened to jump on it because I was just looking at. I was looking for advice. You know, how do you sort of move from being a lead manager or director to actually running an organization? And this article talked about sort of 7 shifts that people have to make. You know, you have to, instead of being focused on gathering information, you need to integrate information among across disciplines. You know, instead of I can't remember some of the other ones, but for me, it's making that shift of how do I sort of navigate relationships as an executive director to my board. You know, I can't look at them as people to give me advice, but and they're also, you know, 25 people that I'm reporting to, but I also have to manage them, and I have to motivate them, and I have to sort of keep them on track to make sure some of the work that I want to see happen gets done. And that's something that's new for me, right? So I think I'm good at facilitating work and people, but navigating that kind of new relationship was different for me. And so for me, Faye Tim, who was my first boss, has been great. You know, I've been talking to her at least once every 3 weeks to say, okay, so now I've got this issue. You know, I'm trying to navigate the political landscape in Montgomery County. Give me some advice about how you did that. You know, do I share too much information? Do I not share information? You know, who are my friends? Who are my enemies? How do I sort of navigate that? So there are all these nuances of moving to this new level that, you know, things that I wasn't aware of. So for me, it's great to be able to have someone at a peer level or above that I can sort of be myself with, right? And I don't need to have all the answers. It's okay to say, I don't know, I'm scared, or I'm not really sure how to do this. So, you know, I think the takeaway is that no matter what level or where you are in your career, being open always to asking for advice and asking for help, and people love to give advice. People love to help others. So I know I do, and they like to be asked. So for me, that's been a great resource.
I did want to ask you though, Desiree. You mentioned already how you try and foster your relationship with the mentees that you have. And I'm going to switch to Angela in just a second, who has a mentee story. But for you, what's something that you wish that you had known then that you know now as a mentor? When I say then, I mean before you got into, when you were first emerging into this field that is the arts.
Well, it's actually the very advice that I just gave. I wish I had been more forthcoming earlier to ask someone to be my mentor. Because you think 20, 30 years ago, there weren't many women, first of all, in this field, in levels of authority, or levels of any authority. And so my fear was, oh, they're gonna think I wanna take their job. Oh, they think I'm gonna be a pest. And the real knowledge base that I wish I had was they probably would have been very excited to mentor me, and I should not have been so afraid to ask. But time went on, and I learned, and I'm not afraid. I'll ask for anything that I want at this point.
And you not being afraid to ask, that's anyone, right? Not just a fellow woman of color. It could be anyone.
It can be. One of the things that I've now surrounded myself by is what I call a kitchen cabinet. These are basically women who I know possess the brain trust that I need to help answer the questions that I have going forward. And they each know they're part of this cabinet, so I can talk to them collectively, or I can talk to them individually. So this is a group of mentors that I've put together that I know I can say, hey, Jennifer, blah, 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 what do I do? Or this is what's happening. And mentors are good. They can be either psychologists who let you talk and they just listen, and they will say, so what do you think? They help you get to the answer as opposed to just telling you what to do. Or they can be door openers, and they can be your sense of network and put you together with people. So mentors can serve different levels. And don't be afraid to ask a man to be your mentor. Steve Harvey says it best. Think like a man, act like a lady. They've been doing it for a long time, especially white men. And I learned a lesson very early from a white male when I was 12 years old, my English teacher. And I'm going to tell this real quick, and we need to get to the other panelists. But I want to tell you this because what it taught me. Sometimes a mentor can be a mentor without you knowing it. And I wrote a paper once, this was in 1965, in the deep part of the civil rights movement. My paper had a lot of indications of the use of the word Negro, and I spelled it with a capital N. When I got my paper back, he had struck through it. I'd never seen so many red marks on my paper in my life. I was offended by the red marks, but even more so offended that he struck out the capital letter of N and said it should be a little n, a lowercase n. I went home crying to my mom, and she said, Desiree, let me tell you something. First of all, Negro is a capital N. You will never be a little n. You go back to that teacher and you have him correct your paper. I'm 12. This is a 6-foot-something white guy. What am I going to say to him? 1965. But I took my mother's advice. I went back and I told him what she said, that I'm not a little n, make this a capital N, correct the grade on my paper. He wanted to speak to my mother. I said, you don't have to. I represent my mother. What that taught me in a mentorship capacity is I'm not afraid to speak to anyone about anything. I got through that at 12. That was a huge mentoring lesson. The second one was with my boss at Arena Stage. I've been working 3 jobs, fellows program, community relations, lobbying, getting paid a certain salary. Someone asked to recruit me to another city, another state. When I posed that to my boss, he offered me a lot more money to stay. I was offended. So you mean to tell me I've worked 3 jobs, making this amount of money, and now you're gonna offer me this salary because you feel like I might be leaving you? That's a lesson. So I won't tell you what happened after that. That's a great story too. But anyway, mentors can come in all both sexes and all races, and take advantage of the lessons learned.
I want to move to Angela. Angela is coming from the perspective of being a mentee. So if you could tell me, what was your story briefly about, how you got into the arts from science, and then how you acquired a mentor?
So when we talk about ourselves professionally, we always want to be able to try and find a common thread, so people can latch onto it, understand kind of who you are in a very, without very much time. And I think my common threads have really been about working in the nonprofit sector and working in education. As was mentioned in my biography, I have a science background, and actually one of my first jobs out of college was working for a couple of different museums as a science educator. So I did that for a couple of years, and that helped me understand what the nonprofit sector was. I said, oh, that's what this is. This is what's going on. Here's a mission statement. It never occurred to me that people would work because they believe in their mission. So when you're 22, you think things like that. And it was a really valuable learning experience in that way. And then because I also had a strong arts background, I have a classical music background, I ended up getting a job with an orchestra, which had actually a very substantial education program. And I've been fortunate to be able to carve out a piece of my job and all of the jobs I've had that touch on education or arts education, because those are things that are just really important to me. So that's the quick version of my story. In terms of finding mentors, do you want me to talk about that?
Yeah, well, I know you have been a mentee, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So tell us about how you acquired your first mentor. Okay,
so in thinking about this panel discussion, I actually thought about 2 people who've served as mentors and still do. And the first one actually is a former boss of mine. So actually, again, when I was a science educator, I worked for a woman, Sue, who I've still kept in touch with, and I'll actually see her every couple of months, and we talk a lot. And so it seems kind of easy to actually have a former boss be your mentor, just because it's kind of a built-in relationship that you have. The other person I was thinking about that I want to talk about is a woman, actually another woman named Susan. And the way that I met her was actually through informational interviews. And that's something, especially for people who work in the arts and people who work in this kind of town or want to work in nonprofits, informational interviews are actually a really great way to meet people. I have never been turned down for one. So I feel like people who just work in the arts are just so nice that they're always willing to share with you, and they're always willing to make time for you to help you kind of get to know yourself better and to understand what's going on professionally better.
If I could ask you to break down a little bit informational interview. for those who may not know what that
Okay.
entails.
Yep. So I guess typically what I would do in terms of an informational interview is I would sit down and talk to someone that I knew who was professionally close to me. So for example, when I met Susan, what I did was I sat down with someone else who I knew who worked in the arts education field, who I had not worked with directly, but knew me through an old job of mine. And so I sat down with him and I said, you know, I've been doing X, Y, and Z in arts education. I really want to learn more about education. And so he said, you should talk to Susan. And Susan works in education. She knows that field from this perspective that's different from you. She's also worked in it for a number of years, and so can offer you a perspective that would be really valuable. And so when I ask for an informational interview, I always make sure to make that professional connection when I'm contacting someone who does not know me personally. And then when I sit down with them, for example, when I sat down with Susan, I talked to her and I said, I have this background, and here's how my background is related to education. Here's my background in the arts. And I'm interested in learning more about what kinds of positions I can get in education if I'm not a teacher. And so she sat down and talked to me about what she saw in her field, the kinds of jobs that she saw, the kinds of organizations she saw that might be good for me to learn more about, and also other people that would be good for me to talk to. So it's much more about maybe learning about the field or the particular organization they work for, rather than saying, I want a job and I want to I want you to interview me.
Great, thanks. You mentioned how your relationship sort of developed with your mentor being a former boss of yours, but tell us a little bit more about how you've maintained that relationship. You say that you still keep in touch with her every couple months or so.
Yep. So my relationship with my former boss, actually, interestingly, I worked for her in Michigan, but she moved to DC at the same time as me. So, so it was fortunate in that way. So in the last couple of years, I've communicated with her a lot more and have just been able to see her a lot more. But we would actually just stay in touch every couple of months in general, and I would just let her know what was going on with me. And what I was doing professionally and what I was thinking about professionally. So we did maintain that relationship even when we were not geographically close to each other. I have to say, one of the things I find valuable about staying in touch with a former boss is that she really understands how I work and my work style. And so if I'm having an issue and I want to talk to her about it, her advice is very specific. Yeah, and that I just find enormously beneficial.
So you're coming from the perspective of being an intrapreneur. Does anybody out there know what an intrapreneur is? So Lizette, if you could tell us, what's an intrapreneur?
I have to say, I didn't know what an intrapreneur was when you guys contacted me about doing this. Jennifer Bowman shot me an email and said, hey, we are putting together this panel and we thought that you might be a good person to talk about being an entrepreneur. And so I went and I Googled what an entrepreneur was, and I have it right here. And the definition on Wikipedia is, entrepreneurship is the act of behaving like an entrepreneur while working within a large organization. So I thought, oh, I guess I am an entrepreneur. So, I'll do it. So that's what an entrepreneur is. And the way that I could define my career has really been an extension of my career as a college student in undergrad school. So as an undergrad student, I majored in theater, and I had a work study, and I was working in the theater department in the main office. This was back in 2000, in the late 1990s, early 2000s. While there, I noticed that the theater department was really Eurocentric, and I noticed that there was a huge diversity of students that were not being cast in the productions that the department was producing. And since I was working in the office, I worked right next to the chair of the department, and I knew that it was going to be a challenge to try to get the department to, open up what they were presenting. And so I also had, because I worked in the office, I had access to the demographics of what the students in the department were, and that was also very diverse, and it wasn't reflective of what was happening on stage. So a couple of friends and I started a student organization, and we started producing work of artists of color, and just creating work not just for the performers, but also for the people that were in scenic design and all of that. At the same time, right around that time, it wasn't just us that were noticing this trend. There were a lot of theaters, regional theaters in Los Angeles and in Orange County that recognized that, and there were a lot of foundations that were giving money to these organizations to make sure that those theaters were developing work and that they were nurturing artists of color. And so, fortunate enough, after I graduated, I was able to get my foot in the door at one of those theaters, which is the Ford Amphitheater, that had a program called the Latino Arts Initiative. And that program was established. The Ford is a LA County Arts facility, and it was really established to make sure that this was right around the time that the census in 2000 came out. And it was, again, going back to demographics. In the census, it was reported that 46% of LA County was Latino. The Ford did an internal assessment and realized that only about 9% of the artists on stage were Latino, and that only 13% of the audiences that were coming were Latino. And so they instituted this initiative to make sure that that diversified and that we broadened that. I got an internship there. I didn't actually get the internship for the Latino Arts Initiative. I got the internship in the box office. But I made sure that I charmed the hell out of the director of that program. And after the internship was over, I had been working in the box office, but he invited me to stay in touch and all of this, and someone else, and I was hired as a coordinator for operations within the theater. And then when a position opened up for the initiative, I started working there. So this initiative, like I said, was focused on broadening the demographics. And how do you, the question is, how do you do that? How do you make sure that more, Latinos are coming to the theater? And I mean, when we really think about it, it's an easy answer. And organizations, a lot of times, because of their mission statement or because of the artistic director's vision or aesthetic, there's a limited perspective as to how you can do that. So, knowing that there was this mission to broaden this, through the program, we just got creative, and we said, well, we have to make sure that we're bringing in the youth. We have to make sure that we're going out into the community. We have to make sure that, so we started developing, you start developing all these different programs, and you use, as much information. You have to make sure that within the organization that you're observing what's happening, and so that you can plug in what your mission is and what you care about into every aspect of that organization, whether it be translating your website, and you're translating your materials, to making sure that there's an usher at the door who can address any person who doesn't speak the language. So after 3 years of doing that program, another entrepreneurial, I guess, aspect of it was, well, let's assess what we've accomplished and how else we can expand. We were able to, as mentioned when my bio was read, we were able to go from 13% up to 40% of the audiences be Latino. So we said, who else are we not reaching? And so it was also, part of it was also making sure that we were documenting the work that we were doing, and had proof and had, paper and numbers, and saying, well, we were able to reach this by this. Well, how about now that, these demographics show that, how about now reaching this community? So we've expanded. So the Ford has expanded, and while I was there, it expanded into focusing on the Asian and Pacific Islander communities. And now, I mean, I left there maybe almost 3 years ago. And now after I left, they expanded to, you know, just targeting very specific, like various different demographics. You know, at the same time while I was there, and another entrepreneurial part of the picture is, you know, staying aware of where the grants are coming from, and finding a way to continue to, again, do the work that you care about, but also linking it to where the money is, so that you can creatively continue to nurture, you know, your program and bring in money and support, but also, you know, finding a way to use those funds. So there was this trend of participatory arts programming, and and so how do we continue to nurture these audiences that are underserved while also, you know, doing this participatory work? Well, that's easy. You know, we do these jam sessions, and, you know, we target them to these underserved communities. So so that's, I think that addresses. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, I'm just curious to know, it seems like you've always had, as a passion of yours, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, of inclusion or, you know, integration of different cultures into the arts. I'm curious to know, how is it, or how were you received by that chair of the theater department when you first recognized that, hey, wait a minute, there are no Latino people on stage, or there are no people of color on the stage? How were you received by him?
Right. Well, I could have done one of two things. I could have had a conversation directly with him about it, or I could have done what I did, was just do something about it. And I had seen other students that were not even from my perspective, that were, you know, that kind of fit that Eurocentric perspective, but that wanted to change it a little bit. And I had seen them come into the office and try to have conversations with him, and still didn't get through. So I knew that I probably wasn't going to get through. So we started the organization, the student organization, and no one ever talked, like no one in the department ever addressed me about it. I came into the office, I did my, you know, I processed the payments for whatever, and I did whatever I needed to do. No one ever talked to me about why I was doing this work, you know, because they knew why I was doing it. And they also didn't stop me. There were maybe conversations that happened, you know, somewhere, but I didn't let that, you know, get to me, because I knew that what I was doing was valuable. That, interestingly enough, that chair, the year after I graduated, was kicked out of the department because someone found out that he was plagiarizing, and you know, and so he was kicked out. And now that department actually incorporates a lot of much more diversity in terms of the programming that they do. And I'm pretty sure that the work that we were doing through the organization had an effect. And you know, it's like what's happened with what's going on right now with the GOP. You know, they're thinking about, well, how do we make sure that now they're starting, now that they saw the results, now they're starting to think, well, how do we make sure that we do address the changing demographics? It's like, well, you've had the numbers for a while, dude.
It's like, okay, so now you want to think about it. You know?
Exactly.
Wow. What has been, I guess, sort of some of the challenges that you've faced coming up in the arts, and you know, that you've sort of brought to your mentor?
You know, actually, I guess I have to say one of the biggest challenges that I have is very personal, and it's just trying to identify what is it that I actually want to do. I know what I'm interested in, and I know what I enjoy. And how do you turn that into a job? Or how do you turn that into a career? Yes, how do you turn it into something you get paid for? And I have to say, I have been fortunate in being able to find jobs that I found interesting and have enjoyed, and have been able to use my skills and have gotten paid for it. And so I have been fortunate in that way. I think kind of another challenge that my mentor, my former boss, has been really great at helping me out with is just getting a little bit more perspective when I'm actually in the job, and getting bogged down in kind of nitty-gritty details or problems that problems that in retrospect are not very large, but are holding you up in trying to do your job. And Sue has just been really great at helping give me that perspective. And so, you know, if I'm having issues with managing staff, she'll talk to me about it and she'll say, here's how I would work through this problem, or here's how I think you can work through this problem. I think the other thing she's done is a little bit preemptive. One thing I really value in her, she'll talk to me about her job. So she'll talk to me about the staff she manages, her colleagues, her boss, the issues that come up in her job, and how she handles them. And so hearing her, you know, and watching her model that behavior, I think in a lot of ways has really helped me out to understand how to be very professional about all of this.
And for you, what have been some of the challenges you've had to face and that you were fortunate enough to be able to bring to a mentor still? And what are some of the challenges that some of your mentees may have that they've presented you with?
A minute. Well, some of the questions that I've asked have been similar, actually, to what you were just saying. You know, how to encourage a staff member to stretch a little bit. You know, my style of leadership is that I want everyone that I work with to grow and to help them identify what they want to actually accomplish and how can I help them facilitate that. I just think that's really important in a job. It's not strictly getting the task done, but helping staff members move to the next level. Yeah, I actually just asked a colleague of mine how to do that. I was talking to another friend of mine who runs the National Dance Project, and as I'm curating a season for next 13-14, I'm very much aware that this is my first time out of the gate, right, as an executive director. And it's like, so how do I sort of make sure that I'm positioning things in a way that sort of puts a stamp on what this organization will stand for now moving forward? And I've gotten a little bogged down with that. And she said, you know what? Just get it done. Just program it, and because you're not going to be able to do that all in one season. You've got to think about it in a 2 or 3 year cycle. She's like, get this done, and then you can focus on 14-15 because you would have known your job, and you would see how your first season went, and you would have a better sense of how to tweak things. So that was really helpful. And this is a colleague of mine that we worked together, and you know that was incredibly valuable information to sort of take the pressure off myself to realize that, you know, give yourself time to be able to set things in motion. In terms of people asking for advice, I mentioned this earlier about, you know, salary negotiations, or how to make a choice about your job, your next job move. Colleague of mine was up for a couple of different positions, and she felt like she should have been making more money in one job offer, and I passed on what my first boss told me about thinking about a job package. You know, it's not always about the compensation. It's about, you know, where is this going to, what kind of skills is this job going to give you? Or negotiate your vacation package, negotiate, you know, the way that your schedule is going to be, or negotiate, everything's negotiable. Everything is negotiable, and don't let anybody tell you that it's not. So that was one. And then some other questions have been about how to think about identifying your next move, and what kinds of things that you really enjoy, and how do you sort of what you were saying, talking about, you know, this is stuff that I'm interested in, how can I sort of parlay this into another field? How do I go from either programming to funding, or how do I sort of, you know, what kinds of skills do I need? So.
Thank you so much for sharing. Really quickly, I just wanted to ask you, Desiree, after 20 years of being in the arts, right? And then previously, before that, 20 years in engineering, you've now decided to go the entrepreneur route. What made you make that decision? And we have about 7 minutes before question.
Okay, it was forced upon me. My job at Arena was eliminated in August, along with 7 other positions. I should have left Arena 2 years ago, but I got comfortable in earning that salary, and having a false sense of security. If you haven't been there, you understand. And so I wasn't surprised that my position was one that was eliminated, but it wasn't the timing that I would have chosen. But what's so great about it is it's forcing me now to move in the direction of being an entrepreneur, to being a consultant, putting together all of the experiences I have had in my entire career and make it a package for me. I wanted to piggyback on that negotiating. Don't be afraid to call your own shots, and it is a package. Negotiate relocation expenses, negotiate salary, negotiate vacation, negotiate time. And I did that, and once you do it, the fear factor goes away. So now I'm at this point where I just recently finished designing my own logo. That's huge, because that defines graphically who I say I am. And then develop me, also at the same time doing my business plan. But one of the things integrating what I'm doing now with my mentors, when I've called them, and believe me, I have, stressed, like, oh my God, how I'm gonna pay the bills in December or January. Every single mentor, without fail, has said to me, Desiree, you can do it. You have everything that you need to be a success. So one of the challenges is believing my mentors and believing in me. If all of these people are saying you can do it, why do I still have this fear factor that I can't? But I can, and so having it repeated over and over, you have what it takes to make it work, and I'm a strong spiritual person that God doesn't put you any place that you're not supposed to be at the time you're supposed to be there. So everything that I've done at Arena, I've raised $35 million for Arena. Why can't I do that for us? You know, why? But, you know, taking all of those skill sets and not being afraid. I have the Rolodex, old school, but all those board members I know with deep pockets, they know how well I work. So the point is, your mentors can push you beyond your limit. And I also wanted to add, and I'll give it up, I wanted to posit that the ladder can be enough. Yes, we're trying to break through the glass ceiling, but if you are focused, determined, passionate, and unafraid, you can build other steps on that ladder upon which to ascend, to get to your dream, to get to your goal. Or sometimes you may have to get off that ladder and get on another one, right? Or get off the ladders altogether and just navigate the grounds on which those ladders stand, and then figure out how to pull it all together. And that's what I'm doing now, and I'm excited about it.
Step by step.